Today we're diving into Pixelgun's deleted features. Over the last 13 years, countless updates have been released, and along the way, some of the most broken and weird features have been introduced and removed. Most people just assume these were removed to keep the game from being boring or fix some issues. The real reason is much more complex than that. But don't worry. I've dug through hundreds of pages of information about Pixelgun 3D, and I've narrowed it down to some of the most significant and interesting cases of removed features from the game, along with potential reasoning as to why the developers may have removed it in the first place. By the way, I'm Drain. I make deep dive videos on games like Pixelgun 3D with high quality video production. Without further ado, enjoy. Before you understand why so many features were removed, you first have to understand one of the most significant and game-breaking mechanics this game has ever had. The Smart Bullet Bazooka was a heavy weapon introduced in 2016. Upon first glance, it seemed like every other heavy weapon at the time, but it was far from that. The stats weren't really the issue, it was actually the homing bullets. Meaning, as long as you shot somewhere near your enemy, the rockets would automatically track them. I think it's pretty obvious that a weapon with built-in aimbot would eventually become a problem. But in theory, this sounds like a good idea, and it would make it easier for newer players to at least stand a chance against better players without having the nearly perfect aim they do. But in reality, it did the complete opposite. But to understand why this became such a big issue, you have to look at how matches actually played out at the time. 2018 was the peak of the 3-cat spam meta, where skilled players could dominate lobbies just off of movement and weapon switching alone. And while a lot of players saw this as the most skill-based era of the game, most of the player base was still casual and younger players. So naturally, over time, the skill gap between the casual and sweats grew continuously, resulting in thousands of players complaining that they were constantly getting destroyed by players they couldn't even hit once. In an attempt to nerf the 3-cat spam and make the game more beginner friendly, the developers introduced things like the weapon swap cooldown, and eventually weapons with the homing attribute. And over the next couple of years, they kept adding more of these weapons, like the Judge and the Nanobot's rifle. And yeah, in their defense, it did make the game easier, but it also made it feel pointless to actually try. Because what's the point of improving when you would just end up getting spammed by someone using a weapon that basically aimed for them? Even though a lot of players heavily disliked the homing bullet attribute, there was still a large portion of the player base that actually enjoyed it. So you would think the developers would just nerf it, or simply weaken the tracking ability. But instead they took a completely different route. They didn't just remove the homing ability, they straight up deleted it, and removed every weapon within the category, refunding the players who purchased them in the process. However, this wouldn't be the last time they handled a situation the same way. In some weird cases, they didn't really remove the problematic feature at all. One of the best examples of this was the resurrection gadget. If you had this gadget equipped, after you died you were automatically respawned, and the player that initially killed you wasn't credited for the kill. This sounds a little annoying, but not the end of the world, because in modes like Team Deathmatch, you're talking about maybe 2 or 3 kills not being credited, out of the 20 to 30 kills. But it was a pretty game-changing issue in modes like Duels, where the entire point was to get the most kills, and instead of getting 20 to 30 kills, most people only got 3 to 5. On top of that, in 2017, it was significantly harder to get gems than it is today, and the resurrection gadget cost around 265 gems, which was a pretty large sum at the time. Eventually, it got removed roughly a year later in 2018. The thing is, it didn't really get rid of the mechanic, because less than a year later, they released the denial gadget, which did the exact same thing, with the biggest difference being it wasn't purchasable anymore and was only obtainable through the clan system. While it doesn't revive you the exact same way, The concept is more or less the same, and still lets players avoid giving the kill, which was the entire problem from the start. At this point, if you thought this was exclusively a weapon-specific problem, it was definitely not only limited to weapons, because the pattern you noticed when it came to how developers handled weapons becomes apparent in every other removed feature. While there were some overpowered weapons that got removed, like we discussed, there were also entire systems that faced the same fate, but for a completely different reason. One of the lesser known ones was potions, which were part of the game back in its earlier years, around 2014 to 2016. Potions were consumables that gave you a specific effect for a short duration, typically around 2 to 3 minutes. Just to name the most popular, there was the speed potion, potion of regeneration, and the anti-gravity potion. And I also forgot to mention there was the sandbox exclusive potion, called the big head potion, which just made your head really big. If you take a closer look at the potions side by side, it's pretty apparent that they're the same ones as the Minecraft ones, or at the very least, heavily inspired by them. Now that was never officially confirmed as the reason for their removal, but it probably played a part in why they didn't want to keep them in the game. When the original potion system was removed, it was replaced by the gadget system we have today, which is honestly a much better system in my opinion, because you're not having to spend coins every match just to get some basic effects. Now you can just buy one gadget and slowly upgrade it as you level up. And again, instead of refining and improving the system, they just replaced it. Another early version system that was removed entirely was the helmets. Helmets were added in 2016 with the 8.1.0 update, and were basically just an extension of the armor system. Similar to the armor, you could upgrade the helmets through different tiers, with the weakest level, which was the wooden helmet, then the iron, gold, crystal, ruby, and the strongest tier being the adamant helmet. But instead of protecting you against body shot damage, you were protected against headshot damage. It was a pretty simple system, but I honestly prefer it over the complex gear and armor system we have today. And later on, they replaced helmets with headgear, which works completely differently since instead of giving you added protection, each headgear piece has its own unique abilities. And even though some of the old helmets still exist as skins, the actual helmet upgrade system itself is gone. But not everything that was removed was necessarily problematic, and this is actually one of those features that I don't think should have been removed at all. Back then, instead of fully buying a weapon, you randomly had the option to rent certain weapons for a limited time, which was honestly a really useful system that actually let you try significantly more powerful weapons. And on top of that, once your trial period of usually a few games ended, you were offered the chance to buy the weapon at a discounted price. This is one of those features that didn't really hurt the game or the experience for other players, and if anything, incentivized people to spend more money on the game than they intended to. But for some reason, they just removed it entirely, which is super disappointing because of everything they've removed. This one mutually benefited the players and the company. The multiplayer features were definitely the focus, but that doesn't mean the campaign was safe. Most people never realized that even parts of the campaign were changed over time. One of the most known examples of this was the Pyramid Head from the school level. He appeared in earlier versions of the game, around 2014 to 2015. However, in update 10.1.0, he was completely removed and replaced with the Rider boss we have today. Pyramid Head would be the first boss to be entirely removed from the campaign. The developers never exactly confirmed why they decided to remove him, but the community speculates it was the result of potential legal action or fear of legal action from the Silent Hill creators, which I mean, it literally ripped it from their game basically. But like I mentioned, it was the first boss to be removed, but it wasn't the only. Similarly, the hospital level had a completely different boss, originally being the blood slime, which was basically just the slime enemy but larger and red, but was removed in update 11.0 and replaced with the boss we have today, the chainsaw doctor. As far as why it was replaced remains unconfirmed like everything else, but the speculation cited on the fan wiki is that the blood slime was a bit too similar to the magma cube from Minecraft. Again, take that with a grain of salt. Regardless of why it was removed, I feel like the chainsaw doctor was a pretty big upgrade from the original red slime boss. The red slime felt not only out of place, but just pretty lazy since it was just an enlarged version of an already existing enemy. The Chainsaw Doctor is much more fitting for the hospital level as a whole. The bridge level also had its original boss replaced, with it originally being the armored stalker. The model and general design closely resembles the creeper from Minecraft, but not as much as the next one, resulting in it being removed and replaced in update 11.0 as well, by the infected truck driver. And similarly, I feel like the decision to replace the armored stalker with the infected truck driver was a pretty strong decision. Ending the section off, this one wasn't a boss, but it was pretty memorable from the village level. The creatively named Faced Stalker was nearly a one-to-one copy of the Minecraft creeper. I mean, there's just no arguing this. And surprisingly, it wasn't completely removed. It just reworked a bit, resulting in the current version of the creatively named Stalker enemy we have today. These were all a part of the earlier campaign structure from 2014 to 2016, when each world actually had a unique theme and enemies tied to it. While these weren't necessarily major features on their own, they helped give each level and world their own identity. Everything up until this point has been reworked or completely deleted, but none of them have slowly disappeared like this one. One of the most unique maps, and one that actually caused some community backlash when it was removed, was Inside the Code. If you don't know, this map was completely different from anything else. Not only did it have anti-gravity mechanics, but if you fell into the void, you would just bounce right back up, instead of dying like on other maps. A lot of people felt like it was an extremely difficult map to play on, because of how chaotic it was with the low gravity and bouncing mechanics, but I feel like that's what kept it interesting, and it stopped gunfights from feeling repetitive, as well as making it harder for people to just spam. And as we talked about earlier, as Pixel Gun started shifting towards being more casual friendly, a map like this just didn't really fit the game anymore, with it eventually being removed in update 11.4.0. Even though we would see this map come and go briefly over the next few updates, it wouldn't remain as a constant map like it originally did. Whether you loved or hated it, there's no denying that it was a huge part of Pixel Gun's earlier years and overall identity. One of the most controversial additions to the game, and arguably the start of the game's downfall, was the Lucky Chest update. The fact that you could spin it once daily for free, with the option to spend 3 gems to spin again, made it more acceptable. With the addition of this chest brought some of the first mythical weapons to the game, like the Golden Friend or Power Claw. When the Lucky Chest feature was initially introduced, it gave players a rewarding and exciting feeling when opening it, but now the overall feelings towards chest in general are completely opposite. But over time, the free daily chest became less and less rewarding, with the shift from complete weapons to weapon parts, ending with where we are today, with the game being littered with a million different lotteries, and some of the worst cost to reward ratios. Eventually, the original free daily chest was removed. When you take a step back and you look at every forgotten or removed feature we talked about, the weapons, systems, campaign enemies, and even the maps, they all are part of the same pattern. Instead of improving what was already there, Pixel Gun would just remove it entirely, without really thinking about the potential community backlash, or the effects on the players, which is probably why the game feels so different today, compared to how it used to. Over time, all of these small changes stacked on top of each other, making the current version of the game nearly unrecognizable, compared to the version we fell in love with all of those years ago.